Better Daily, where we work hard in our minds, bodies, and our spirits to become 1% better every single day. Download the app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.live to catch the video version of these podcasts. Here's your host and my dad, Alex Van Houten.
What is up, Betterment family? Welcome to Better Daily Live. I'm your host, Alex Van Houten, and today is Word Thursday. Happy Thursday. And on Thursday, we go through a word, and today the word is obesity. I'm very excited to unpack this word with you, and I'm very excited to dive into it together. Before I get there, I want to say happy almost end to the Faithful 40 Challenge. You guys are doing an amazing job. Finish strong. We're in the last half of our final week here. So whether you have been faithful this entire time and you've posted for every single day in the last 36 days on your commitment to your betterment in the Faithful 40 Challenge, or if you just haven't been a part of it up until this point and you're like, you know what, I'd still like to see what this thing is all about and I'd like to be involved in the last 4 days, do it. Post something. I don't care if you post your steps, your workout, your protein count for the day, whether or not you got enough sleep last night, or just some general thoughts or questions around your mindset that can inspire and encourage the group. Let's finish strong. Let's keep this momentum going. So today, obesity. Obesity is a powerful and difficult word, and I don't know if I can tackle everything there is to be tackled about obesity, kind of like when I've covered strength or courage or perseverance. There's a lot more to dive into, but just a few thoughts as we talk about obesity. One of the things I want you to hear from me today is that obesity is not a lack of effort in discipline and willpower on the part of those who are struggling with it. Obesity is a very, very powerful word in the public health space, in the medical world, and even in common parlance. Generally, it means you're over fat. The dictionary definition of obesity is that you have a BMI of 30 or greater. BMI of 30 or greater. BMI is just a measure of your density divided by your surface area. So it's how tall you are versus how much you weigh, basically, is your BMI. If you have a BMI over 30, you're considered obese. And if you have a BMI over 40, you're considered morbidly obese. But what does obesity actually mean? Because that's just a classification, a definition, right? Because in the medical world, if you're obese, you're more likely to have struggles with diabetes, you have more likely to have struggles with thyroid dysfunction, more likely to have struggles with certain types of cancers, and you're also more likely to have struggles with cardiovascular disease. You know, just mechanistically speaking, if you have a lot of fat pressing in on your organs, it's really hard work to pump blood through that fat and also to continue to support that amount of body mass. And it's really tough on your joints and whatnot. You know, those of you who are not obese, I invite you to go put a 100-pound pack on your back and then walk around all day and see how good your joints feel at the end of the day, right? Because obesity is it's a manifestation of carrying too much, right? It's carrying a heavy load. It's physically a heavy load, but it's a manifestation of carrying a heavy load. Here's some things that we know is fueling obesity in America. And I live in Arkansas, so I live in the third most obese state in the nation as of right now. There are times we've wrestled with Mississippi for first, and that's not a trophy that we want. I'm hoping that I can positively affect that over the coming years as I live here. But here's some things that affect obesity. First of all, we know that obesity is passed on, that there's a genetic component to obesity. We know that. In fact, a very interesting study in Denmark showed with 452 participants of children who are adopted by parents, that the children 75% of the time followed the track of their biological parents. So if you adopt a baby and you are thin, but the parents of that baby were obese, then that baby is 75% more likely to be obese. Okay, even if the parents maintain thinness. And this flies in the face of common thoughts and and practice around obesity, we've known for a long time that if you're born into a family with obese parents, then you're much more likely to be obese. And it was thought, oh yeah, it's just the food environment. Those people don't know how to eat. Those people don't exercise. Those people choose to be lazier than other people. And that's why they get fat. And that's not it at all. There's a genetic component to the whole obesity thing. For whatever reason, from a hormonal perspective, these people are much more likely to put on fat, when the rest of us might live exactly the same way and not put on fat. In fact, this week I talked a bit about the genetic differences in breaking down carbohydrates, and I talked about amylase. There's a enzyme in your saliva that breaks down carbohydrates and makes it readily available to the bloodstream when you start chewing on stuff. If you have lots of amylase in your saliva, that means you are really, really good and really, really efficient at pulling carbohydrates out of foods very quickly. And so those of you who have high amylase in your saliva, and that's not something you can control, has nothing to do with willpower, has nothing to do with what you choose to eat, has everything to do with your genetic heritage. Those of you who have lots of amylase are really, really good at pulling carbohydrates out of your food, getting it to your bloodstream really quickly, which is great and efficient from a digestive perspective, but it's really hard on your blood sugar and really hard on your insulin system, especially if you have a diet that's higher in processed foods. So that said, obesity, as we understand it, is increasingly becoming a genetic phenomenon, meaning that there are genetic markers for whether or not a person's body responds to stress, responds to certain types of foods, responds to a lack of exercise, responds to inflammatory markers and whatnot by putting on weight. And that's a big deal, okay? Because I have a lot of compassion for this. I have never in my life been obese, and that's not a virtuous statement. I'm just saying I've never been obese, but I do have a genetic heritage of Ehlers-Danlos. And I understand that on a daily basis, my body has to wrestle with something that I didn't choose for myself, but it does require a certain lifestyle on my side of things in order to keep me out of pain and dysfunction and injury. Good morning, KT. Thanks for joining me. And so when we talk about the word obesity, it's important to understand that there's a deep genetic component to obesity. It's not, I said at the beginning, I'm going to say it again. It's not a lack of hard work. It's not a lack of discipline and willpower. There is at least a 75% component of obesity that has to do with understanding how to play the best game with the hand you've been dealt, genetically speaking. The other thing we need to understand about obesity is that it's a financial problem. When we look at our foodscape in America, the financial incentives are really backwards. And I mean that to say that when we look at the shelf life of something like Doritos, and we look at the components of what goes into making a Dorito and how easy it is to buy more Doritos and the fact that they don't go bad in the pantry and stuff, that means that Doritos cost very little. Chips just don't cost much. The cost per calorie is extremely low. There's lots of calories, lots of energy molecules in Doritos and very, very little nutrients, right? Whereas the cost per calorie for something like sardines, or salmon, or spinach, or blueberries, or Greek yogurt, the cost per calorie is significantly higher, right? I've made the joke that until a bell pepper costs less than a bag of Doritos, then we're going to continue to have a problem with obesity. Because if we take a group of people who, genetically speaking, will respond to certain foods by adding fat to their body, and then we make all of the fat accumulating foods less expensive than healthy, non-fat accumulating foods, then what we end up with is a population who is financially incentivized to eat in a way that makes us larger than we should be. What's up, John? Good morning. Good to see you, brother. And so when we talk about the word obesity, it's so important for us to understand that there is a genetic component to obesity. It's not poor decisions by somebody over a long span of life that makes them fat. And I'm not saying that there aren't decisions that could be better for them, but I think it's important for those of us who aren't struggling with obesity to take a good long look in the mirror and say, I'm probably not making any better decisions than most people. I saw this in Colorado. So Colorado is the first fittest state in the nation. It's the least fat. It has the lowest rates of obesity in the nation. And I thought moving to Colorado, I'd be like, man, people would be so much more health conscious here. We would find people, eating healthy, and there'd be organic community farms everywhere. That's not the case. Colorado has the highest per capita breweries in the nation. People love their craft beer there, man. People drink beer all the time in Colorado. Another thing you'll find in Colorado is my personal favorite restaurant of all time. It's called Crave. If you go to Colorado, specifically Colorado Springs or Denver, and you go to a place called Crave, they make the coolest burger ever. It's like stacked this high. It's got all kinds of different meats on it. It's got fried cream cheese and candied bacon, and they'll serve it with a craft beer from down the road, right? How in the world is Colorado the fittest state in the nation? They're not eating any better than most people, right? And that's the rub, is that when we talk about actual habits and actions, I have clients that I work with on a regular basis who are obese and are actively working so hard to rectify that, to learn how to play the best game with the hand they've been dealt. And they are eating way better than so many of the other clients I know, or even people in my life who aren't wrestling with obesity, right? When I look at their food journal, it's like pristine. I wish everybody ate like this. This would be healthy and good for the population. And yet they're still wrestling to get that weight off, right? So we need to understand that there are financial incentives that make obesity a bigger problem than it should be. And I'm not purporting to solve the issue here. I'm just unpacking the word obesity. So when you think obesity, don't think, oh, that person eats way more calories than they burn. That, they have poor willpower. They're not working hard. You're doing it wrong. Okay. And if you're somebody who's wrestling with obesity, you're probably not doing it wrong. You're probably not making significantly poorer decisions than anybody else. It's just a matter of learning how to play the best game with the hand you've been dealt and building the best in you so that obesity becomes less and less of a problem. Just like my Ehlers-Danlos. If I'm playing the best game with the hand I've been dealt, I live in less pain, I live with less injury, I live with less fatigue, and I live with less disruptions to my daily life. And I'm not saying everything's perfect, but I am saying that I'm doing much better than most people who have the genetic markers for Ehlers-Danlos because of that process, because of working hard to play the best game with the hand I've been dealt and improving on that. I'm not perfect, but improving on that every day. The other thing we need to understand about obesity as a word is that it is a psychosocial problem as well. It's no mistake that those who struggle with obesity also tend to score higher on the ACE test. ACE is adverse childhood events. Adverse childhood events. And adverse childhood events are a big deal. This is sexual abuse. This is living in poverty. This is wrestling with drugs and alcohol, not themselves personally, but others in their lives that maybe they've grown up in an alcoholic home. Those who struggle with obesity are more likely to have experienced abuse either from a father figure or someone else. And that's a really big deal. Wrestling with depression and anxiety. Those who wrestle with obesity also tend to score higher on the ACE test. And I'm not saying that that's an excuse to not play the best game with the hand we've been dealt, but it's important for us to understand that, because when, we as a health and fitness community or the medical establishment will say to somebody who's obese, hey man, you got to fix your diet. You got to start exercising, right? Sometimes at the core of all of that is something so deep and so difficult to wrestle with that changing food and changing exercise will not address the deep, dark, difficult things that really are at the root of why emotional eating is so hard, right? So let's say I've experienced abuse as a child, and I would also in adulthood say, oh yeah, I wrestle with emotional eating. I wish I could stop eating ice cream before bedtime, right? Well, is it the behavioral emotional eating of ice cream before bedtime that's the real problem? Or is it that when I have a stressful day at work, I experience a higher level of anxiety, and in order to calm myself down before I can shut my brain off and go to bed, I'm turning to ice cream? Why? Well, it's a lot easier than just about everything else to wrestle with anxiety, right? There are deeper psychosocial things that could be positive and beneficial. For instance, I had some adverse childhood experiences that I won't get into here for time duration purposes. I'm happy to talk offline if you care to. But one of the ways that I have positively and constructively handled that is, one, I've gotten in deep personal relationships where I'm able to have dialogues about those sorts of things. And that's powerful and it's helpful and it's really, really good for me to be able to do that. I've also done a lot of journaling. I've done a lot of work in my life where I've been able to write down those adverse childhood events, and I've been able to work through those and glean the information that I need to from them so that I don't have to cover up the emotional difficulty when it comes up, whether it be ice cream or other things, right? And then also exercise has been a powerful part of my journey, not because I'm burning a lot of calories. And if somebody who is obese is wrestling with adverse childhood events, oftentimes I would say that the benefits of exercise, benefits of a good exercise program has a lot more to do with building that confidence inside yourself and understanding that you are made of sterner stuff than you know, and you are resilient and you can be a powerful force in the world. And the scared child inside that has been wronged or has had a difficult time with something that was brutal in the past, that child gets to grow. And I'm tearing up just thinking about it, because the fact that those who wrestle with obesity, and like I said, I'm not one of them, although I feel a lot of kinship with that. Those who wrestle with obesity oftentimes think that it's, the weight they're carrying, the extra weight that their body puts on them, especially in times of stress and inflammation and whatnot, is somehow a lack of hard work on their part. And many times it couldn't be further from the truth. And so we need to understand that. We as a society need to understand that, not everybody who's obese has wrestled with adverse childhood events, and not everybody who's wrestled with adverse childhood events ends up obese. But there are deeper, more difficult wounds to handle that we as a society tend to cover up the emotional side of things with, weird prescriptive blanket statements. I'm sorry, the ketogenic diet is not going to help you overcome the fact that you were abused as a child. It's just not. And so the emotional eating thing is going to be a problem until that is addressed, until you start to see yourself differently in the mirror, not looking at yourself in the mirror and going, oh, wow, that guy's fat and he can't do what he needs to be able to do, but looking yourself in the mirror and going, that guy's worthy of love. That guy right there, broken and decrepit and difficult as it might be, that guy's here for a reason. God made that guy for a reason. He made him well, and that guy's going to learn how to make the most of himself, right? That is a very deep and difficult and healing process that we as a society need to understand and wrestle with. Obesity is not just the accumulation of fat such that our BMI is over 30. There are deeper things that are worth wrestling with. And the last thing that I'll say about obesity is there's a community aspect to this. So in the research, when you look at comparing different diets with regard to weight loss, there are two things that are common among successful diet plans. And it's not how many carbohydrates they eat, and it's not how much protein they eat, and it's not how much exercise. Two things that are common among successful long-term weight loss programs. The first thing is community support. You would think it'd be like, oh, it's the ketogenic diet. It's better than the Jenny Craig diet, and the paleo diet's better. Nope. Community support. If the weight loss program has a community support component, meaning there are people in your life who are also working toward goals like weight loss, and there are people in your life who are supporting your journey, giving you the slap on the butt, the attaboy, the keep up the good work, in recognizing your changes and having the difficult conversations that need to be had, and maybe sharing best practices. The community support is the number one most effective component of long-term weight loss programs. And that flies in the face of just about every misconception around obesity that you can imagine. What it says to me is that obesity is not, the overcoming obesity is not a individual sport. It's just not. You're not going to do it alone. You're just not going to do it alone. That's, the research bears it out. You can pick any diet you want. You can pick any exercise program you want. If you're alone, you're going to fail. Period. And that's an important thing for us to understand. And I think that not just obesity, but many of the things that we wrestle with, many of the things that we are trying to figure out how to play the best game with the hand we've been dealt. Adverse childhood events or difficulties in childhood, maybe addictions that we're trying to overcome. Maybe it's genetic things that have been handed down to us, whether it's Ehlers-Danlos or cancer or body fat accumulation, whatever it is. I think it's important that we understand we're not going to overcome these things alone. And I'd love to hear your thoughts. When we look at obesity, have you had some misconceptions about it? Or have you personally struggled with obesity? And if I've said anything here that resonates with you, I'd love to hear about it. Or if you have some questions or maybe some contentions, maybe I said something that you're like, no, that's not quite true. That hasn't been true of my experience. I want to know, because I myself have never been classified as obese. But over the past 16 years, as a trainer, I've developed a deep, deep compassion and empathy for the issue and I see it very, very similar to what I wrestle with Ehlers-Danlos, which is navigating the path of understanding how to play the best game with the hand I've been dealt and making the most of it. So thank you guys so much for joining me. I appreciate you very much as we dove into the word obesity this morning for Word Thursday. This has been Alex Van Houten with Better Daily Live. It's just 1%. You got this.
Thank you for joining us for 1% Better today. Don't forget to subscribe for the podcast. Leave us a raving review to tell others how Better Daily has helped you in your journey. If you want more Better Daily, download our app and join our Betterment family at betterdaily.live. Use code POD to get 25% off your subscription. That's POD, all caps, to save 25% on your subscription. We all have a cross to carry. It's later when we do it together. Go to betterdaily.live today.